Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 585. I like to see it lap the miles. One of the poems that is so unbelievably annotated and spoken of. In fact, several of you have asked about my own annotation of these poems. And because I'm just going to tell you in advance, this is what it looks like for me in terms of my own annotating of this text. And I'm going to do my best to try as much as possible to read past all my own annotations to even be able to read the words of Emily Dickinson in this classic poem. One scholar has pointed out this is probably the best known poem with a social theme. It is another riddle poem. It was published in 1891 with a title, which I'm sure Emily would have loathed, called The Railway Train. And I point that out because it is a riddle poem where halfway through the poem, we're not always sure exactly what she's talking about. Or is she talking about, again, one of her poems about cats or felines? Is she talking about a dog? Is she talking about a horse? And of course, the iron horse will be the word picture that we're dealing with. Now, there's some biography here that I think is necessary, and so let me share it with you. The first thing we want to point out is that Emily's daddy was a huge force in bringing the new railroad from Amherst to Belchertown, and the opening of all of this celebration happened on 9 June 1853, okay? We should point out as well that in Amherst, the train station was just across the road from the bottom of the Dickinson Garden, and Emily had all kinds of opportunities then to see and hear the new trains, just like the one that we're going to have described in this poem. We should also point out that Emily did talk about the new railway in a couple of letters of 1853 to her brother Austin. The first letter is letter 123, where she says the following, quote, by the way, these are fascinating quotes to get inside the mind of Emily as well, quote, while I write, the whistle is playing, obviously of the train, and the car's just coming in. It gives us all new life every time it plays. How you will love to hear it when you come home again, end quote. Then we have a second quote of letter 127, where she describes Celebration Day, when a trainload of celebrants came over from New London, Connecticut, and she writes, quote, the New London day passed off grandly, so all the people said. It was pretty hot and dusty, but nobody cared for that. Father was as usual, chief marshal of the day, and went marching around the town with New London at his heels, like some old Roman general upon a triumph day. They all said it was fine. I suppose it was. I sat in Prof. Tiller's woods and saw the train move off, and then ran home again for fear somebody would see me, end quote. Notice, she loves the new train, but she'll avoid the crowds that will be a part of this. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments. I hoped as well that you worked through the preceding 584 poems. We just finished with 584. It ceased to hurt me. Now, of course, in this poem, Emily will be exalting the power of the train, but also possibly raising the question about the significance of this new technology. I want to point out that this is a poem of a single sentence, right? And in some ways, as one scholar has pointed out, it mimics the movement of a train. So as we read this, I want you physically to look on the page and to notice the use of the dashes. Give it a kind of jolting-like movement. Notice as well that we will begin with stationary, move through motion, and end with stationary with the word stop. I also want to point out how she contradicts herself by beginning with I like and ending with the words horrid and docile. This is how she says it. I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up and stop to feed itself at tanks and then prodigious step around a pile of mountains and supercilious peer in shanties by the sides of roads, and then a query pair to fit its ribs and crawl between, complaining all the while in horrid hooting stanza, then chase itself downhill and knee like Bonanerges, then punctual as a star, stop docile and omnipotent at its own stable door. Now, it is significant that in the poem she never actually says that she's writing about a train, but it is of course, clear that she wants us to make the connection between technology like a train and something mammalian, something animal-like. And the way in which she'll describe this will remind us of our studies when we did Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass to a Locomotive that we'll finish with if we have time. She says it this way to begin with. I like to see it lap the miles. Now, of course, this phrasing only used one other time in 241. I like a look of agony because I know 'tis true. You'll remember our study of that one. What is it that she likes about the train? First of all, she says, notice, by the way, listen to all the L sounds, the P sounds, the F sounds. Every time you hit one, underline it. And notice that she's playing games with what you can hear when we hear about railroads. Now, you guys, you have to appreciate, today, we kind of roll our eyes at trains because they're not that big of a deal anymore to us, right? We drive across some on the edge of our town as we come into our town of Orland. But when trains first are introduced into the American economy, it's kind of like what AI and ChatGPT and the rest of the AI programs are for you guys now. It radically transforms the culture at large. And Emily seems to have a sense of that. Notice she begins with, I like to see it. So she'll start with sight. Lap the miles. By the way, study the verbs of this poem. It's quite fascinating. Notice again the dash. And lick the valleys up. Now, because you've been reading already 584 Emily poems in the Johnson edition, you've seen this riddle game get played where she'll name something with an it pronoun, but we don't know exactly what animal she's referencing. So what animal is it that laps and licks? But it's the valleys up. What? And stop to feed itself at tanks. Now, you could obviously imagine this is a kitty cat that jumps up on a water tank to get, some drink or something. Well, by the way, start with stop and end with stop. Do you see it? The very last words of the poem will end with stop as well. And then, prodigious step. She only uses the word prodigious once in all of her poetry, and it's here. By the way, we'll use prodigious and supercilious. Can you see the endings of both of those? And those s sounds almost sound like the sounds of steam engines coming out of a train, yes? So notice she's playing remarkable games on multiple levels here. She says she likes to see the prodigious step that's taken around a pile of mountains. Pure Emily. Pure Emily. I mean, think about as you drive through, for example, Wind River Canyon, and you see those trains that are hugging right up against that rock face. You see that imagery, and then you immediately think of this poem, don't you, right? And supercilious pier, we did see by this this word kind of arrogantly. We saw this, by the way, in 373. Pier in shanties by the sides of roads. By the way, she only uses this word shanties one time. Obviously, shanties gives the description of some kind of what? Socioeconomic poverty, we might say, by the sides of roads. And then a quarry pear from 491, to fit its ribs, an alternate reading for Emily was actually sides, and crawl between. Now, some have pointed out this kind of almost like sexual language here that you're reading, so I'll leave that one to you to kind of notice how she plays the game. Then we move from seeing to hearing. Complaining all the while, right? The sound of the train, the loudness of the train. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine the difference in the sounds before choo-choo trains and after choo-choo trains are coming through towns where they're rumbling on the tracks and all of that. Complaining all the while in, horrid dash, hooting stanza dash. By the way, horrid will take us back to 444. You'll remember our discussion there of that word. And then the fact that she uses the word hooting and then stanza suggests some kind of musical quality. And when we get to Walt Whitman, her contemporary, who she never met, and she never read Whitman's poem about the locomotive, he'll play the same game. Then, finally, the train, after it's gone up the hill, chases itself down the hill. It's an animal chasing its tail. It's kind of funny to see it that way, the playful way, the imagery of it. And then finally, to neigh, to make it sound like a horse, and then all of a sudden we go, oh yeah, ponies are the way everybody transports before railroads. The railroad displaced the pony as the most important thing that an individual could own was a pony. Why? This is the way you transported yourself. You either rode it or you put it attached to a carriage of some kind or a wagon so you could get around. Of course, trains became known as what? The iron horse. Yes, the iron horse. This neen, by the way, will take us back to 494. You'll remember that one other time that word gets used. Now, Borni Charis is the referencing here to a Greek myth, the mighty shouter. You know, those of you who know your biblical text will remember that Jesus calls James and John, the two brothers, in Mark 3:17, this same word, Bornegius. The idea is what? It's so loud. It's so connected to noise and power at the same time. Then finally, punctual as a star. This is interesting, this use of the word punctual as a star, meaning it's like it's always on time, which is kind of, going to be the reason. By the way, the whole idea of timepieces begin once we have railroads. We don't have concerted efforts to know what time is until we have railroads in first Europe and then in America. Why? Because everybody's got to have a timepiece to know when the railroads will arrive or depart. Punctual as a star. It's interesting that the word star is referenced here. It's almost like cosmic or God-like in some way. And then all of a sudden we've got the stop at the beginning of the line. And I think it's in many ways the key word, because the railroad stops a whole lot of things because of its power, right? The technology, the power. It changes everything. Dash, and then we go from horrid to docile and omnipotent. Now, in many ways, this is interesting. How can it be docile and yet at the same time omnipotent? And of course, taking us back to the idea of stars with gods, right? And then finally, it will stop at its own stable door. Again, this is the, some have equated this with the idea of the Christmas story and the Christmas star that leads the Magi to where Christ is in the manger or the stable, right? The idea being that somehow the train will have replaced for Emily the power, the dynamism of the pony itself. Now, what are we going to do with a poem like this? I think her argument is that technology can be both satisfying and horrifying, right? The scholar Gordon has said it this way, and I think it's brilliant, so I'll just read it to you guys. He says it this way: this poem nicely, now I'm quoting Gordon, My Wars Are Laid Away in Books is his biography, work with Emily. The poem nicely represents the huge destabilizing forces of the Industrial Revolution, not omitting the shanties and blasted bedrock, yet the conclusion, with its safe return home, has a naive and reassuring patriotism. The poem evokes two opposing aspects of Dickinson's life. One, her sympathy with her father's invincible push for a rail link, and, quote, two, her dependence on the bucolic shelter he provided, untamable and domestic, omnipotent and docile. She and her locomotive exemplify the same paradox. I find it a remarkable insight. At 2b, what are we going to do rhetorically, in terms of rhetoric here? Well, one scholar has called this the ingenious use of syntax, metaphor, and tone. And I think go back and read it for yourselves, and especially read it out loud, and enjoy the choo-choo train, can I say it that way? The choo-choo train effect or quality of it. I want to notice as well all the senses that are being selected here for us. We've mentioned Walt Whitman. We mentioned that To a Locomotive in Winter is his famous poem of 1876. By the way, this one written in 1862, we think. You'll maybe remember this from our study of Talks with Walt at learnstrong.net, where we did all of the poems of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. He'll say it this way: compare this poem of a celebration of a train to Emily. Thee for my recitative, thee in the driving storm even as now, the snow, the winter day declining, thee in thy panoply, thy measured dual throbbing, and thy beat convulsive, thy black cylindrical body, golden brass and silvery steel, thy ponderous sidebars, parallel and connecting rods, gyrating, shuttling at thy sides, thy metrical, now swelling pant and roar, now tapering in the distance, thy great protruding headlight fixed in front, thy long pale floating vapor pennants, tinged with delicate purple, the dense and murky clouds outbelching from thy smokestack, thy knitted frame, thy springs and valves, the tremendous twinkle of thy wheels, thy train of cars behind obedient, merrily following, through gale or calm, now swift, now slack, yet steadily careening. By the way, let's just pause and remind ourselves, in Emily's poem, there is no mention that this train is either carrying freight or people. Type of the modern. Emblem of motion and power, pulse of the continent, for once come serve the muse and merge in verse, even as I here see thee with storm and buffeting gusts of wind and falling snow. By day the warning ringing bell to sound its notes, by night thy silent signal lamps to swing. Fierce-throated beauty, roll through my chant with all thy lawless music, thy swinging lamps at night, thy madly whistled laughter echoing, rumbling like an earthquake, rousing all. Law of thyself complete, thine own track firmly holding, no sweetness debonair of tearful harp or glib piano thine. Remember the use of the word stanza in Emily's poem. Thy trills of shrieks by rocks and hills return, launched over the prairies wide, across the lakes to the free skies, unpent and glad and strong, strong being the last word. Finally, to finish here, at 3b, in many ways, one scholar's pointed out, the train became the servant machine that became the master, end quote. We think of Frankenstein's monster, don't we, in his classic novel, or AI today. And some have called this Emily's self-parody of almost like what a bad poet might sound like to try to talk about trains. What are your thoughts about technology and the ways in which technology is changing everything? Thank you.